This video is the first one of two on Chapter 5 on equity and social welfare. So you should definitely, with every chapter, read the goals of the chapter in the beginning. So this one has only a few goals. So once you've studied this chapter, you should be able to distinguish between Pareto and Bergson. Nozick is a big name, so Nozick has an entitlement theory with 3 principles in it, which you should know because it's very applicable to South Africa. Then you should also explain how redistribution of income can be justified in terms of the theory of externalities. Small distinction between cardinal and social welfare functions you should understand, and then also discuss the efficiency principle, implications of policy. So we look at redistribution. When is redistribution Pareto optimal, or when is it Bergson optimal? When does Nozick agree with redistribution? Does redistribution have anything to do with externalities, and so on? So this chapter is about redistribution. So you know by now that according to Pareto, you cannot have a Pareto improvement if anybody becomes worse off than before. So the way we understand Pareto optimality hardly ever makes it possible to redistribute wealth from one person to another, because then you will harm one and benefit another. But even in Pareto sense, you will see that one can have redistribution. Bergson improvement is easier to obtain because as long as you improve society's welfare, then Bergson says it's okay to redistribute. So let's just look at this from the Edgeworth box diagram point of view. So let's say we start at the red dot. It's on the contract curve, so it's Pareto optimal. But person 1, the red dot is very close to person 1's origin, so person 1 is poor in this context and person 2 is rich. Person 2 lies on a very high indifference curve. Let's say we want to move to another point, such as the green dot in the Edgeworth box. Now that will mean that the distribution of total resources is much more equitable. At the green dot, both are more or less have the same level of welfare. But it's not Pareto optimal because we've moved off the contract curve. But for Bergson, this would be an improvement if we could improve society's welfare. Nozick's entitlement theory is one of those questions that you will see very often on a test. Nozick, because you can think of a 6-point question. Name the 3 conditions of a just distribution by Nozick and say in one sentence what each one is. So then Nozick said there should be justice in acquisition. So you are entitled to acquire things that do not belong to others or that do not place others in a worse position than before. It's okay to acquire things. Then it's okay to transfer things from one individual to another. So in principle, Nozick is not against redistribution. So he says it's okay to transfer from one individual to another on a voluntary basis. Now the standard market method of transfer things is that you buy something in a transaction. I go to the store, I buy a basket full of goods, I give the store owner money for it, and both of us are happy. He's making a profit, so that's voluntary. Injustice in transfer is if I steal something from from you, then that's not voluntary. You wouldn't give it to me on a voluntary basis if I steal it. Then rectification of injustice. So if any one of the first two principles have been breached, justice in acquisition or justice in transfer, if any one of those principles were breached, then it's okay to redistribute the wealth back to where it belongs. And that is basically what Nozick's entitlement theory said. Now the textbook claims that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission made use of Nozick's principles, Nozick's entitlement theory. Well, if they say so, then it's probably true, but this was news to me. But what is important for me is that you should be able to look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the outcomes and the goals of it, and say whether it fulfills Nozick entitlement principles. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission redressed human rights violation during apartheid. It also had a specific time period. They looked at 1960 to 1993. They looked at a very specific period, and if someone was guilty of human rights violations during that period, then they could get amnesty, or they couldn't get amnesty, or so on. And the Reverend Desmond Tutu was very prominent in this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So read about it in the textbook, read box 5.1 on page 85, because this is really very, very important history of our country. A second very important topic is land reform. So you can certainly have a look at the Land Reform Act of 1997. It's been 25 years now since the Act came into being, and we're still struggling to do land reform. Now, we have had great success with this, but many people are still unhappy I mean. So I Googled the Land Reform Act, and then I found the white paper on South African land policy, which was written in 1997. Now, you know, they have a process. They first have a green paper, then they have a white paper, and then it becomes law. So the white paper is 139 pages long, and I will just quote a few paragraphs from it. And I will read it because I think this is so important. Land ownership in South Africa. This comes from the white paper. So I copied and pasted from the white paper. Land ownership in South Africa has long been a source of conflict. Our history of conquest and dispossession, of forced removals and racially skewed distribution of land resources has left us with a complex and difficult legacy. To address the consequences of this legacy, the drafters of the South African Constitution included the following 3 clauses. So this is very interesting. So 3 clauses from the Constitution itself. A person or community dispossessed of property after 19 June 1913 as a result of past racially discriminatory laws or practices is entitled, to the extent provided by an Act of Parliament, either to restitution of the property or to equitable redress. So they should either get the property back or they should be remunerated for it. I'll say something about the date. So that's a very peculiar date. Why exactly 19 June 1913? And so the Constitution, the orange paragraph was written into the Constitution, and it says that the Parliament should write an act. So they should write a Land Reform Act. Now the Constitution was agreed on before 1994. And then the government got an instruction in the Constitution to draft an act which will do land restitution. That's very interesting. So the second clause in the Constitution is more than just restitution. It says that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to foster conditions which enable citizens to gain access to land on an equitable basis. So this is more than restitution. This is people that never had land should also now be enabled to access land. The government should continuously be active in taking care of citizens to be able to gain land. What is interesting is the little clause within its available resources. The Constitution cannot just tell the government to give everybody land, because who's going to buy it, and how are you going to acquire it in a just way? So within its available resources, the government should always be active in enabling citizens to gain land. So it's not going to happen overnight. The third clause in the Constitution says that a person or community whose tenure of land is legally insecure as a result of past racially discriminatory laws or practices is entitled, to the extent provided by an Act of Parliament, so this is in the same Act, the Land Reform Act, either to tenure which is legally secure or to comparable redress. So they should. This is about land in the rural areas that don't belong. People don't have the papers for their land that they live on, or that their families have lived on for long periods of time. So the government should make sure that people get legal tenure of the land. So the three clauses in the Constitution is about restitution, redistribution, and tenure. So can you see Nozick? The Constitution writers didn't even know about Nozick. We know about Nozick, but the principles that Nozick wrote down, I think what our forefathers did in writing the Constitution was in line with what Nozick had in power. So I will continue with the second video after this.